when we talk about the daimonic, as in the case of the demonic, we inevitably have to look at the idea of possession and what this is. So the question I ask is, when we talk about possession, are we talking about demonic possession or are we talking about daimonic possession? As a forensic psychologist, I of course hear this often. I don't know what came over me. So I was someone else. I felt like I was possessed by the devil.
Keep watching to learn more. You can now download all 9 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at cihs.edu.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is the daimonic. With me is Dr. Stephen Diamond, who is the author of Anger, Madness, and the Daimonic. Dr. Diamond is a clinical psychologist and also a forensic psychologist. He is an adjunct faculty member at John F. Kennedy University and an assistant clinical professor at the Pacific Graduate School of Psychology. In addition to that, he has taught at the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, Switzerland. Welcome, Stephen.
It's great to be here.
It's a pleasure to be with you. You have focused in on the psychology of evil, which is a topic I think many people prefer to avoid. It seems very popular in our culture to kind of discount evil in some sense, to say that we don't want to associate ourselves with the theological implications of evil and the devil. And at the same time, we seem to be living in a world in which all sorts of atrocities still continue.
Yeah. The term evil comes with a lot of baggage, as you mentioned, theologically. And so, especially people who have been turned off to organized religion tend to want to stay away from the whole concept of evil and find and feel that it's a negative concept or one that isn't useful. But my own position is that it is a useful concept from a psychological point of view, and I think it's one that we need to look at much more carefully, because evil is a reality, and we see a lot of it.
How do you define evil? Why don't we start there?
Yeah. Well, one of the greatest evils to me is violence. So I would define violence as the greatest form of evil. Now, of course, there's all different dimensions of violence. There's gross violence, mass murder, this sort of thing. But there's also much more subtle forms of violence where people are cruel to each other, interpersonal hostilities, domestic abuse, and this sort of thing. So to me, this is the greatest form of evil, is human violence.
Mm-hmm. I think at one point in your book, Anger, Madness, and the Daimonic, you refer to evil as being related intimately to human suffering. And that, in a sense, mental illness itself is an evil, even because the one who is mentally ill is suffering.
Yeah, controversially, I equate the two. I say that mental illness, mental disorders, psychopathology, as we say, is a form of evil, of modern-day evil. And it's a form of evil because it is a form of great suffering. So this is not to say at all that the individual is evil, the person suffering from a psychiatric disorder, but that the suffering itself is the evil.
The disease.
Yes. And this is, of course, one of Webster's definitions of evil, is the very fact of suffering in the world.
Now we're going to get into the tricky question, and it's a point that I want to return to over again, because we introduced this program as the Daimonic. Now, most of our viewers are certainly acquainted with the term demonic as an expression of evil, but we're using the word daimonic in a bit of a different sense.
Yes. Again, the word demonic has its theological baggage and background. In theology, the demonic is something that is purely and solely evil, one-sidedly evil, irredeemably evil. And of course, in theological terms, the demonic is associated with the idea of demons, or with Satan, or the devil. Now,
you're referring to Christian theology.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Now, the idea of the daimonic is something quite different. This derives from the Greek philosophy, and I would say the daimonic is more of a psychological than a theological model, to my way of conceiving it. The daimonic contains the seeds of its own redemption. So that when we talk about the daimonic, it can be the source of evil, but it can also be the source of creativity and of positive outcomes.
I mean, the root word is related to the same word as deity, is it not?
Yes. Well, it comes from the Greek word daimon, and the daimons were where they were to the Greeks, they were kinds of gods. They were spirits. They were powers from within or from without that would influence one's behavior and influence one's life.
Now,
for better or worse.
When I studied the life of Socrates, the great philosopher, he was well known for having what I was taught was called the daemon.
Yes, or daimonion was the other term for that, and this. For Socrates, his daimonion was, it's been described as a voice, although it's not clear that he heard it as a voice, but it was something in him
inner knowing
that spoke to him in an inner way, and that prevented him from making mistakes in a way, prevented him from making a wrong decision or a wrong turn in things that he did in his life. And he had a very close relationship with his daimonion and loved and revered it, despite the fact that it can be troublesome.
So we're talking about one might think of it as a kind of raw force of nature, perhaps, an energy that can be both sublime and wonderful and truthful, or it can be destructive.
Yes, and is typically, to some extent, both, because there are both sides of it. The daimonic is, it was defined by Rollo May as a natural function that has the capacity to take over the whole person, and it is typically it can be constructive or destructive, but typically some degree of both.
Yeah, this gets us into the question of obsession or possession. Many people, criminals particularly, talk about, I was overcome, I was possessed by an evil force. It made me do this.
Yes. Now, when we talk about the daimonic, as in the case of the demonic, we inevitably have to look at the idea of possession and what this is. So the question I ask is, when we talk about possession, are we talking about demonic possession or are we talking about daimonic possession? As a forensic psychologist, I of course hear this often. I don't know what came over me. So I was someone else. I felt like I was possessed by the devil. That's why, or the devil made me do it, you see. And so the question really is, well, what is this? It seems to be a real phenomenon. The phenomenon is real because people report this experience. But what's really going on? And my own thinking on it is, and to give an example, one of the key examples of the daimonic that I talk about, of course, is anger or rage. And if we think about anger or rage as a prime component of the daimonic in our day, then we can think about how, and I think we've all had this experience, how one can be overtaken or overwhelmed by one's rage in a certain situation, overcome by the feeling or some other feeling. Love is another example. One feels taken over by feelings of love or possessed. So I think to think of it in terms of eros or in terms of anger or rage is quite helpful. A lot of the defendants that I talk to as a forensic examiner are very, very angry individuals who have not been able to manage their rage constructively. And what happens is it tends to get suppressed or repressed over a long period of time, and then there tends to be an explosion. And the rage, the daimonic rage, has this capacity then to take over the individual and to drive the individual into destructive behavior.
One of the things that you point out is that psychology today does not have a good handle on the question of anger. Some psychologists say, and it's an ancient tradition, that anger is a form of madness and we have to control it, we have to suppress it. Others say, oh no, it's good to express your anger, let it all out, have a primal scream. Get really in touch with your anger.
Ventilate.
Other therapists are taught you must not get angry yourself in therapy.
Yes.
And Freud wrote in Civilization and Its Discontents how the very act of civilization alienates us from some of our own primal urges, and aggression, rage, anger is one of those things that we're ambivalent about because it's part of us and yet it's somehow an uncivilized part of ourselves.
Yes, I think we're quite confused about it as a culture, and I think that is part of the problem that we're having when we have problems with violence, because what we see are these eruptions of anger or rage that has been not well dealt with, that has been suppressed or repressed over time, not only individually, but collectively and culturally. So we see the daimonic can be expressed vicariously by individuals of a repressive or suppressive culture.
Now, you seem to be implying in your book that if we as a species, as a civilization, want to achieve our potential for creative accomplishment, for building a peaceful society, we have to confront the daimonic within us, our rage, for example. And yet we don't seem to know how to do that very well.
Well, it's a difficult thing to do. Look, we all intuitively and instinctively fear our anger or rage, and fear other people's rage, and for good reason, because we know that it can be extremely destructive. This is a given. This is of course, the historical association with these primal passions, that they are primarily negative, evil, and destructive, and therefore should be suppressed or removed from the situation or toned down as much as possible. I think that only leads us into greater problems. So there are a couple of difficulties. One of the difficulties is that we don't really have adequate paradigms for thinking about this sort of dual nature of anger or rage, or what I call the daimonic. And the idea of the daimonic is, I think, a rather useful and helpful paradigm for us to consider when we think about anger or rage and what it means and how to deal with it. Because if we understand that it carries positive potential, that it carries a kind of power and energy that can be helpful to us in our life, that can lead to creativity, that can even foster spirituality, then our attitude toward it, I think, becomes rather different than when we think of anger or rage as demonic rather than daimonic.
I suppose one of the problems with that is the very word, for example, mad and madness are linked. Anger itself is thought to be a kind of insanity. And so much of modern psychiatry is, for example, the use of drugs that just suppress the anger, suppress the rage. And I think you would probably argue that this also suppresses the daimonic in its positive sense.
Well, indeed, I would argue that, although I certainly would accept that psychiatric medications can be very helpful in many different situations, and in working with patients with problems with anger or rage or depression or otherwise. What I object to is the sole use of these medications to simply clamp the lid down on the daimonic, rather than try and help the patient to manage it in a more constructive way. And I think there's a big difference there. And again, it has to do with attitude. If the attitude is, these feelings are negative, evil, destructive, have to be gotten rid of, then let's just load the patient up on as much medication as we can to just dampen down the daimonic as far as we can. I don't think that's particularly helpful, and in fact, I think it can be iatrogenic. That is, it can contribute to the problem. But I also want to, in response to your question, state that yes, the word anger is related to madness, and that's no accidental. When someone is angry, we say, I'm mad. That's no accidental ideological connection. Anger, because of its possessive quality, has long been linked with madness. And we often find, my own experience is that in psychosis and in many, many other forms of mental disorders, repressed rage and anger are a central component of the problem.
I think it would be useful to pay attention to the fact that for centuries and centuries before modern psychiatry came up with our definitions of neurosis and psychosis and psychotherapy, these cases were treated as cases of possession, and there were treatment methods involving exorcism.
Well, exorcism is a form of psychotherapy. It's an ancient form of psychotherapy wherein the offending spirits are forced out of the person. And if you look at descriptions of exorcisms, what you will see is that one of the things that comes out of the exorcised individual is a great deal of anger and rage that had been pent up. This is the offending spirit that is exorcised from them. And it's viewed in exorcistic terms, it's viewed as the negative evil spirit that comes out, and there is no ownership of it by the individual. You see, it's perceived as an invading force. It's not me that's angry, it's this angry demon that's invading me and possessing me. And then when that is out, then the person feels better and they go back to their normal way of life.
I think it's interesting from a theological point of view. The demonic or even the daimonic is some kind of an autonomous energy. It might have an origin in some sort of mythological system or in another dimensional system. You seem to suggest that a more humanistic perspective, that really all of this anger, even in its most atrocious demonic manifestations, is really a human reaction to the abuses of life.
Yeah, I think we, as certainly in my profession, in our profession, I think we tend to over-pathologize anger or rage. Mm-hmm. We tend to think of it as pathological. We tend to think of it as narcissistic, and again, as primarily destructive. But I think that anger is a very natural response, an existential response, and has existential roots in the human condition. There are just so many things in life that, as we all know, can be frustrating. There are obstacles that are thrown in our paths every day. There are challenges, and anger or even rage is a necessary emotion, because this can give us the strength and the energy to overcome and surmount some of life's challenges, which take considerable energy to deal with.
Mm-hmm. You know, it strikes me, if you look at human civilization, it seems that in most countries, usually in every generation, there's a war. Mm-hmm. I think it's been going on for hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands of years. Every generation fights a war. And if we apply Freud's analysis to this, that civilization by its nature suppresses our anger, it's as if the wars are an ugly ritual that we use as a way to find some outlet for it.
Well, sure. It can be seen as a collective expression of the daimonic, mm-hmm. if you will, on a cultural level. And I'm not at all sure it's the most constructive kind of outlet. Mm-hmm. And I think it's something that perhaps if we incorporated the idea of the daimonic and valued it more in the culture mm-hmm. and in the individual, and even cultivated it in the individual, perhaps there wouldn't need to be this cyclical mm-hmm. sort of collective madness of war.
William James wrote an essay that we had discussed earlier mm-hmm. today called The Moral Equivalent of War, and he argued that if we're to do away with war, we have to find some sort of a nonviolent equivalent that gives people this opportunity to test their valor, to experience self-sacrifice, to experience total commitment, total sense of being in the present. I'm not sure that we have an equivalent, moral equivalent.
Well, that's right, and an equivalent to somehow experiencing the daimonic, mm-hmm. but in the constructive sense. Yeah. The problem is when the daimonic is simply denied or drugged away or suppressed or repressed, that is when it comes out in its most atrocious and destructive forms, whether that's individually or collectively. Mm-hmm. So until we do incorporate this concept, I think, more into our thinking and start to accept and embrace the daimonic, I think it will continue to show itself in these particularly nasty manifestations.
Mm-hmm. Now, if one were to have your book in front of us, you would see dozens of illustrations of these daimonic or demonic figures, and many of them are very grotesque in the illustration. Half human, half animal, or many different animal parts stuck together in different ways with all sorts of grimacing expressions and snarls and tongues stuck out in different ways. It's sort of ugly to behold. And yet, I suppose all of these are a projection of a very important part of the human psyche.
Yeah, I'd say a representation and a symbolization of the daimonic, mm-hmm. that which again at the same time, yes, there's ugliness in life, there's ugliness in the human psyche, but at the same time is beautiful. It's a very strange mm-hmm. kind of paradox. And of course, when we talk about evil, evil is always ugly.
Mm-hmm.
So
I'm reminded we have just about a minute left, but let me mention the tale told by the mystic Rudolf Steiner, who writes about initiation in its mystical sense. And he says, when we experience initiation, we come to confront a being, the initiator, who is the ugliest thing we can imagine. And it's only by being able to stand face to face and to confront that being that one enters into sort of the higher realms of mystical consciousness.
yes, it's though the daimonic may have ugly aspects and evil may be ugly, the solution is not to turn our eyes away from it. The solution is to look at it, to confront it, and to work our way through it as best we can, and to also try and turn its energies into some positive direction.
Well, in part 2 of our 2-part series on the daimonic, we'll be exploring some of the ways in which this can be done through psychotherapy and through acts of creation as well. And that'll be a pleasure. I would like to encourage our viewers to check their listings for part 2. But for now, Stephen Diamond, I'd like to thank you very much for being with me.
Well, thank you very much.
It's been a pleasure exploring an aspect of human psychology that is often just kind of thrown away in the dustbin. Stephen, thanks for being with me, and thank you for being with us. New Thinking Aloud is presented by the California Institute for Human Science, a fully accredited university offering distant learning graduate degrees that focus on mind, body, and spirit. The topics that we cover here. We are particularly excited to announce new degrees emphasizing parapsychology and the paranormal. Visit their website at CIHS.edu. You can now download all 9 copies of the New Thinking Aloud magazine for free, or order beautiful printed copies. Go to newthinkingaloud.org.
Book 4 in the New Thinking Aloud dialogue series is Charles T. Tart, 70 Years of Exploring Consciousness and Parapsychology, now available on Amazon.
For early access to our videos and live stream events, sign up for our free weekly newsletter at newthinkingaloud.org.